Hey, good morning. Let's get started. My name is Michael David Fox. I am director of the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies here at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. And it's really a great pleasure to open this session of Jill Dougherty's um, Russia and Its Neighbors. And our distinguished guest today is György Busztin, who will be introduced presently by Jill. And my job here is to stay in the background, occasionally ask a question or two, but also to introduce Jill, which I'm very pleased to do because Jill is an adjunct professor here at CERES and a longtime mainstay of our programs here as a teacher and participant, but also has had a very distinguished career as a journalist at CNN. She's the former Moscow bureau chief of CNN, and she had a number of roles at CNN over the years as White House correspondent and other roles, and she continues to have her affiliation there as well. So, Jill, over to you.
Michael, thank you very much. Again, congratulations on your new book. That was a fantastic discussion yesterday with the Kennan Institute about your book, and really, my hat is off. It was fascinating. So, buy Michael David Fox's book is my
Thank you.
recommendation. Well, welcome everybody, and I am really glad to be here. I have to. We're going to have kind of a broader discussion today, and I think it could be very interesting. You know, over the past few months, I've been thinking a lot about the countries that lie west of Russia and what could happen in that region when, God willing, the war in Ukraine ends. In October, I took a trip to that region. So I began in the Baltic region, physically traveling to Latvia's border. Think of the map in your mind, Latvia's border with Belarus, then to Lithuania's border with Kaliningrad, Poland's border with Belarus, and then I went into Ukraine, then down to Hungary, Romania, and Moldova. Took me several weeks, and it really was an eye-opener. You know, those borders, number one, my impression was that they are extremely militarized. And I was thinking, the Iron Curtain. Well, it's not really the Iron Curtain as the Soviet Union built to keep people in. It's more a steel curtain, literally a steel curtain, steel walls and fences between Russia and the West, built by the West to keep Russia out. So it's kind of a different dynamic, but it's quite striking when you see it. And then in the bigger thought that I had about this is that Europe right now is going through a profound transformation, fueled by Russia's war on Ukraine. And the only problem is we don't know what to call it. You know, what is this transformation? There's no bumper sticker. It's not the Cold War, and we don't know where it's going or where it will end. But I do believe it's a watershed moment. And that is why I wanted to discuss all of this with my guest, Ambassador György Busztin of Hungary. Michael has better pronunciation in Hungarian than I do, but Ambassador Busztin, coming from East Central Europe, has a unique perspective. He is a career diplomat and an academic. He is Hungary's former ambassador to Iran and to Indonesia, and he's also a keen observer of Europe's relationship with Russia, let alone the domestic situation in Hungary. So I met with Ambassador Busztin several times in Budapest during my recent trip, and I was very eager to have him join our discussion. So welcome, Ambassador Busztin.
Thank you very much, Jill. Professor, thank you. It's my pleasure meeting you, particularly after your book has been published. Put me on the list, please. And for Jill, I wish to say, first and foremost, thank you. Thank you for coming to our region. Thank you for going to a war zone in your quest for the truth. I really value not just your amazing experience regarding our whole region and especially Russia, but your wish to make the American audience more knowledgeable about what is happening. So I'm at your disposal.
Thank you very much. Again, welcome and thanks for joining this discussion. So just a little housekeeping at the top. As usual, Ambassador Busztin and I will talk for about 30, 35 minutes, somewhere around there. And then we will open it up to questions from the audience. And I hope there will be some questions. I think it's intriguing, and maybe we will get a different aspect to our discussions, which always are focused on Russia in one way or another. And if you have questions, put them please in the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen. By the way, I have to mention the timing is perfect for this because next week, the Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, is coming to Washington. I understand that his purpose will be to try to convince President Trump to exempt Hungary from sanctions against buying Russian oil. Hungary and Slovakia, as we know, are the biggest importers of Russian oil in Europe. So, Ambassador Busztin, just last Thursday, maybe we could begin with this. You were telling me on the 23rd, which is the anniversary of the 1956 uprising in Hungary against the communist government and then violently suppressed by Soviet troops, there was a march, right? There actually, I guess, 2 marches that took place last week. Could you tell me about them? And also, maybe a little broader, do you feel that the march that you were in has anything to do with this transition that we're trying to get at in Europe?
Thank you, Jill. First and foremost, for those of you who are not so familiar with Hungarian or European history, let me tell you that the 23rd of October 1956 was a watershed date, not just in the history of Eastern Europe, but in world history as well. It was the first attempt by a people who were relegated under Russian occupation by the post-World War II Yalta Agreement to rise and reclaim their freedom and liberty. It was a short episode, tragically, because it lasted a mere 2 weeks. But in these 2 weeks, Hungary first managed to clinch a semblance of independence from the Soviet Union, an unbelievable feat, and subsequently faced the full weight of the Red Army for over a week in the streets of Budapest and other places around Hungary when Russia decided that enough was enough and it will quell this rebellion, as it called it. And Hungary was forced back into the fold for another almost 40 years of very harsh dictatorship, getting softer by the day as it was eventually discovered that the Hungarians cannot be kept under the lid by violence and by repression. Nevertheless, for Hungary, the communist experience was a loss of 4 decades, 4 valuable decades, a loss of hundreds of thousands of people who fled after the revolution was put down, and the tragic death of hundreds of martyrs of the revolution, among them Imre Nagy, prime minister during the time of the revolution. So this event is being remembered in Hungary every year very solemnly, and it is, of course, not void of political meaning, particularly now, because Hungary is preparing for its elections come next April. It has been 15 years since Viktor Orban is Prime Minister of Hungary. These were very difficult 15 years, a lot of changes in the world and in Europe also. Tragically, Hungary ended up on the wrong side of history since the war in Ukraine has been unleashed by Russia. There were always tendencies in the ruling party in Hungary, Fidesz, to break free of all those European common political obligations, consensus-based obligations, which we believe, we decent Hungarians, are part and parcel of the life of a democratic country. However, what happened with the Russian aggression against Ukraine was something even more pathetic. And gradually, we have seen Hungary ending up, if not openly supporting, then conniving with Russia. This is something that most Hungarians refuse to agree with. And this was very vocally expressed by the anti-government demonstration, which I was part of, evidently. However, this was not a demonstration in the traditional sense of the word. It was a very dignified march commemorating the revolution, calling for national unity in the face of the hysterical campaigns of hatred that were unleashed by the government against its opposition, and a defense of European values, a defense of Hungary being anchored in the West, a defense of our EU NATO membership, which we feel is being threatened by the current policies of Prime Minister Viktor Orban. So I have to say this, that just ahead of his visit to the US, I wish that the meeting with President Trump will see Hungarian American consensus, but not based on the refusal of Ukraine's rights to its independence, liberty, and sovereignty, but rather we will find out after the meeting that President Trump has managed to convince Mr. Orban to come back into the fold, to make sure that his policies are not in contradiction either with the European trend, either with the aims of the United States, which is willing to make a respectable peace for Ukraine based on preserving its territorial integrity and its sovereignty. This is the way I see it here.
Ambassador, why do you think Orban has this complicated relationship vis-a-vis Ukraine? I mean, on the one hand, in a way he supports, but now he seems to be going in the opposite direction. And certainly sanctions busting puts him in a strange position with President Trump, obviously. But what is behind his logic about Ukraine?
Sadly, as you know, our whole region is rife with tensions around the fate of national minorities. Hungary, as it is today, is the produce of the post-World War Versailles Treaty, which divided Eastern Central Europe, creating new states from the defunct Habsburg Empire. Evidently, making new borders is always a very difficult job, and more often than not, these new borders are not in harmony with what the people on the ground wish to see. And this is exactly what was the case for the Hungarian community today living in Ukraine. It is evidently decades of history that have impacted on this community. Living as a minority in the USSR was anything but a good deal, and definitely many other minorities also suffered in what was called the prison of the peoples. However, after the dismemberment, or rather the collapse of the Soviet Union, the new emerging states all made commitments to the better treatment of the national minorities. Ukraine ended up with not just a Hungarian minority, but with many national minorities. The most sizable of them, of course, is the Russian national minority. And there's where the problem started. These conflicting nationalisms created immense tensions. Some of these nationalisms would have been very easy to handle, but in the frenzy of a new state being born, I think there was not enough attention paid to providing equal rights to everybody. There were justified grievances of the Hungarian community stuck in Ukraine, and I have to say that today now, I believe all the conditions are set to make them feel at home in Ukraine, because successive Ukrainian governments, but particularly this current government, has gone out of their way to make sure that they are in compliance with the European standards and with the requests of Hungary. Ukraine is on its way to become a member of the European Union, and the EU has very stringent rules on how countries should treat their national minorities. Therefore, this problem of how the Hungarian national minority is treated in the Ukraine definitely figured among those issues that shaped the relationship of Ukraine, the independent Ukraine and Hungary. Sadly, what also was added to the mix was the increased pressure from Moscow over the Ukraine. And this increased pressure meant to many Hungarians that should there be an armed conflict, we might be impacted. This created, if not resentment, then it created fear. On top of that, there was a totally unfounded propaganda spread in Hungary and also in some other European countries about the economic support of Ukraine, weakening the economic fabric of the European Union, and particularly creating problems for the EU agricultural sector. We know that Ukraine is one of the largest producers of grain the world over. And in other producers as well, like oily seeds, Ukraine has a very respected position in the world order. Therefore, it was inevitable that there should be fears of competition. But what is the EU for, if not for dealing with fair competition? So I think these fears were vastly overblown. However, they've constituted very fertile ground for spreading rumors. And sadly, for reasons very difficult for me to know, as Viktor Orban's proximity to the Kremlin has grown, or rather shortened, I would say. We have witnessed the atmosphere between Hungary and Ukraine on the government level deteriorating. This is a process that must be arrested. This cannot go on. The Hungarian people, like any other European people, are massively anti-war and anti-aggression. To see a country in the neighborhood suffer what Ukraine is suffering is unacceptable to most Hungarians. Therefore, we would like to see a peace and a just peace coming to life soon between Ukraine and Russia. But we are very hopeful that the initial steps towards this peace have already been made by President Donald J. Trump. I think, regardless of the failure of the Alaska summit, I think if preparations are done in the right way, which means, to my mind, pressure and diplomacy working together, then it might yield a result. How Mr. Orban will be playing in this picture, this I cannot tell, because Europe as a whole, the European Union, is willing to help and very actively help President Trump in his endeavors for creating a just peace between Russia and Ukraine. But for that to happen and for that to succeed, the European position must be strong and Europe must be coherent. Therefore, we have to work together. And I hope that this message, if grudgingly, will be accepted by our current government. And I also hope that April next year will bring changes, and these changes will definitely be manifest in Hungary's policy towards Ukraine.
Yes, thank you. That was really a very in-depth explanation, and I appreciate that. You know, I want to return to this idea of the transformation that has been accelerated by Ukraine, the war against Ukraine, this transformation of Europe in general. And I'm thinking again, my mind is so fixated on that border physically, but if you, big terms, let's put Hungary aside for a second, but big term, you would say each side says there is a threat. And of course, Europe and the allies, the United States, would say Russia is the threat because they attacked Ukraine. If you were in Russia, you would say, of course, NATO, initially it was Ukraine, but now, of course, it's NATO, the United States are the threat. The West is the threat. Do you think, or how would you define what's the real threat in Europe right now?
Thank you very much. The real threat for Europe and in Europe right now is empire building. Regrettably, Russia, after separating from the rest of the Soviet Union, has for some time experimented with becoming a genuine democracy along European lines. And let me tell you this, Russia received all the help from what it calls the West in good faith. It became a member of the G8. It received all the help from those important European and Western institutions that were meant to help the Russian economy in its transformation. Russia had ample space to be familiar with the way Western democracy works. There was an opening of borders which never existed. The two of you know that Russia lived for decades in complete isolation. The way the people of Russia started to travel and became familiar with the rest of the world, but primarily with the Western world, opened eyes in Russia. So everything was set for a favorable change, which could have brought Russia and Europe together. Actually, we were very hopeful that the work that Peter the Great has started and Catherine the Great has continued, the Europeanization of Russia, will now continue after this terrible long hiatus for the benefit of Europe and for the benefit of the Russian people. Sadly, nothing of this happened. Unfortunately, what happened in the Russian economy, you are aware of how the oligarchic tendencies of the privatization going down in corruption and people in power, political power, gaining unfair advantage over the distribution of assets. All this created a lot of resentment among ordinary Russians, and it gave an opportunity for the Siloviki, for the people in the power establishment to become more influential and ultimately gain the upper hand. I very much regret that I might be unfair to Russia, and I think I will get a lot of pushback for this explanation of mine. But all this sadly culminated in the terrible trend of what I call empire building. Instead of trying to prove itself in peaceful fields like economy, science, arts, sports, Russia restarted its empire building project. And the aim was, as Mr. Putin has declared it openly, reconstituting the Soviet Union. We have seen Mr. Lavrov's T-shirt, CCCP. That tells the whole story. I mean, there we are, turning back the wheel of history, which very seldom succeeds. However, this, of course, created justified resentment outside Russia, especially in those countries which lived under the Soviet repression, particularly those that were part of the Soviet Union, like the Baltics. And therefore, it's very difficult for us to accept the Russian reasoning that it is Europe that means the threat. I think the threat comes from those who are bombing. I don't think that this is a misplaced deduction. And evidently, should Russia come to its senses and end its aggression against Ukraine, I think there will be an opportunity to reconsider. I think Europe would receive a peaceful, constructive Russia with open arms, because it is the natural stage or the natural state of things that bordering areas should be living in peace and harmony together.
I do want to remind people, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, the Q&A function. below on the screen. And Michael, I just wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to jump in with a question. I, of course, have plenty of questions,
I
but
do have a question as it happens.
Mhm.
I want to go back to Jill to what you started with, which was this entire swath, this entire region from the Baltic to the Black Sea, right? And it seems to me that there are several particularities in the countries of that whole region vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine. Like the Baltics are extremely worried about further Russian aggression and are acting in terms of developing plans for that. Whereas Poland is an interesting case because in general, the far right or the right wing in Europe has tended to be more pro-Russian, but that equation does not work in Poland, right? So even the Law and Justice Party is not is very pro-US, but also we've seen a turn in Poland against the Ukrainian population that fled the war, and there are trends in Poland that are changing their support for Ukraine, at least in terms of law and justice, it seems. In Hungary, there seems to be a lot of particularities because, as you know, Orban played a special role in the emergence of Trumpism and the MAGA. He played a role in US domestic politics in the Republican Party, even as a sort of held up as a kind of a model for the Make America Great movement. And so there's this triangle, right, of the EU, Russia, and the United States, but different countries are reacting to it in different ways. And you mentioned sort of domestic Hungarian public opinion here is also sort of not favoring Russia's role in this war. And I'm interested in what your thoughts are on the particularities of Hungary in terms of the entire region that Jill spoke about.
Thank you. Well, evidently, Hungary has, as we say in our literature, been a ferry country, ferrying between East and West due to our geographical location. But Hungarian society is tired of being a ferry. We want to be anchored firmly and irreversibly in the western half of Europe. And I think this means that our aspirations within the EU are continuing to be our wish to see EU united, stronger, more competitive, better capable of guaranteeing harmony and happiness for the Europeans, and also fitting into the wider tapestry of international relations and connections. I believe that in Hungary today, 8 out of 10 people, or even more, are fully in favor of Hungary's EU membership, not because it comes with material benefits, but because people knowingly, or if not knowingly, then instinctively believe that the good things are coming from the established democracies of Europe. Human rights, rule of law, the reliability of government policies, predictability, all these things that are in the Hungarian brain inseparable from the European Union. So therefore, I think whatever there might be in terms of distractions based on things like nationalistic or other subjective factors that might come in to the equation, it will not change the fundamental perception of the Hungarian people that they want to belong to the West, quote unquote, the West, meaning in our case, firmly belonging to the European Union and NATO. For your information, Hungary requested membership in both these organizations, and it was among the first to do so. with regard and with respect to our troubled history. So I hope that people outside Europe will not eat the Russian argument that Eastern Europe was forced into NATO. Nothing is further from the truth. And this is true about all the countries on the periphery of Russia who became members of NATO. And it is eminently true about Sweden and Finland, two countries that never even contemplated giving up their neutrality, but under the pressure of circumstance, they were obliged to do so. So I think that this threat for threat analysis is misplaced. And definitely, I have to recall a great American who said that facts are obstinate things. There's no way that we can circumvent this.
Mm-hmm. You know, I wanted to jump in with another aspect of all of this. When I was traveling in those countries, I would say loosely along the western border of Russia, almost everybody I spoke to, from border patrol agents in those countries to political people to members of think tanks, et cetera, all of them said that the biggest factor, one of the biggest factors right now, is what they perceive as the absence of the United States. There is concern, you know, whether the United States would actually, the Trump administration, if, let's say, Russia were to invade or try to threaten a NATO member, would they actually come to, you know, Article 5, would they actually come to the defense of that country? Will the United States provide intel and information and weapons, et cetera? Geopolitically, politically, militarily, et cetera, there's grave concern that the United States is pulling away, and that Europe, albeit it wants to, it's quickly unifying and beginning to try to build weapons, et cetera, but it knows that the United States has played a critical role for ever since World War II, and now it seems to be pulling away. I want to formulate a question, but I would also say we do have a question in Q&A from Courtney Geisert. And Courtney, you are a student at the Security Studies program at Georgetown and also doing a CERES certificate. You are an Air Force intelligence officer, interestingly, and you're asking a very specific question about intel sharing, et cetera. This discussion is a little bit broader than that, but I think the essence of what you're asking is, will the United States continue to support Europe? So, George, if I put this in, let's say, the broader terms that we've been using, what is the effect of what I have heard, and I think many believe, the fear that the United States will pull away or even abandon Europe, leave it on its own to solve Ukraine one way or another? What is that doing to the dynamic in Europe right now?
Thank you. Thank you. First and foremost, I would like to say that we want more America, not less America. And America and Europe, in our minds, are inseparable. It's not just that the United States liberated Europe from Nazism, together with the Soviet Union at the time, but also the spirit of America was of huge importance to Europe because kindred spirits, we can say that the fundamental character of America being exceptional, but anchored and built on democracy, was always a beacon for Europe. And it has always strengthened tendencies of democracy and inclusivity in Europe, even in the hardest times. And of course, during the Cold War, America's support for European democracies was the key to their survival, the key to Europe's survival. Now, I will not wish to say that we are in Cold War 2.0 situation, but sadly we are not far. And I believe that America should consider its historic experience during those times. isolationism doesn't bode well for America. This is my private, humble opinion, because I think that America, like any other country, regardless of being number one in the world and regardless of commanding amazing power and respect, America still needs friends and allies. What President Trump today is doing in Southeast Asia is a clear indication. And I also believe that the relationship between the US and the EU is so special, so unique in nature, in character. Just think about constituent elements of Europe like Britain and France. What immense strengths of the brotherhood, I even would say brotherhood of these countries to the United States represents. And this is a European value that all of us benefit from. So I think that decision makers in the United States should never lose sight of the common values we cherish and the common values that we represent to the rest of the world. And of course, I'm obliged to say that when it comes to the balance of power, Europe is also a tool of assistance to the United States. Don't forget that we have two powerful nuclearly powered countries in Europe, England and France. And we have, of course, great military potential in all the others as well. I hope it will never be put to the test, but on the table in negotiations, this figures and it can represent important weight. So America, please stay in Europe, regardless if this is temporarily an extra burden on you, but I wish that you understand that this burden is not in vain, and all those exertions that America makes in the way of keeping Europe free and stable will benefit America in the end.
There are some questions now in Q&A. One in particular I'm going to read in a second, but again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. There's a question about Georgia, one of my the countries I follow very closely. We'll get to that in a second, but Connor O'Kelly is asking Ambassador Busztin, in your opinion, is there any path for Zelensky to assuage Orban's grievances regarding the Transcarpathian Hungarian minority, or is this merely an excuse to keep relations sour, where no proposed solution will be seen as satisfactory by the Hungarian side?
I would like to say that there is a way to assuage and that this problem can be defanged. How and what Viktor Orban thinks, I cannot tell. I am only hopeful that Hungarian public opinion can put enough pressure on decision makers to change their behavior on this question, because it's becoming untenable that Hungary is behaving with such callousness towards a neighbor under suffering and in a very regrettable situation, facing daily attacks and aggression. So I'm hopeful that the case of the Hungarian minority will not be an impediment, but rather it can constitute a factor that can contribute to the old friendship between Ukraine and Hungary being restored.
You know, there's a question, I just mentioned it. It is from Nino Lejava, who is with SIPA, a non-resident fellow. And it is about Georgia. I don't want to get too deeply into Georgia, but it is one of those countries that I think about, and I've been there. Last year, I was there 3 times. So the interesting part of her question at the bottom, what are the realistic chances for Georgia to preserve and strengthen its Euro-Atlantic course, given the current geopolitical dynamics, which we all know about? Do you expect NATO or the US to elaborate tailor-made Black Sea strategy? And the Black Sea came up all the time when I was in certainly Ukraine, Romania, Moldova, and Hungary looks at that issue too, but especially those three countries. So Ambassador Busztin, again, it's Georgia, but what about this idea of a Black Sea strategy? Should that be part of the thinking of the United States right now as it looks at the whole region?
Thank you. Well, something that I have to remind you about is that one element of the grand strategy of Russia has always been to access the warm seas. And to do that, Russia wanted to control the straits. And to do that, Russia wanted to control the Black Sea. Now, it suffered some very significant setbacks during the war. And my understanding is that it does not at this point represent one of the potent naval powers in the Black Sea. And let us not forget that the major power in the Black Sea is Turkey. And Turkey is, thanks heaven, the guardian of the straits, and this will not change. And Europe has a very strong interest in seeing Turkey stay as it is, strong and responsible. On the other hand, when it comes to Georgia, we only wish that the people of Georgia can make their voices heard. There is a strange and hard to explain nexus between Viktor Orban and the Georgian leadership, which manifested itself in Viktor Orban going to congratulate the Georgian leadership over its stolen elections during the last elections there. Nobody doubts that the elections happened with major irregularities. Why did Viktor Orban go there to say hello? It's anybody's guess, but it sheds very bad light on us, and we hope that the Georgian people who are living under difficult circumstances now will also be able to share their difficult experiences with the Hungarian opposition, much as the Georgian government apparently shared its experiences of stealing an election with the Hungarian government. I think this was the story about his visit there. At any rate, Georgia is in a very dire situation now. The little I know from Georgian intellectuals I happened to meet is that the country is hijacked by an elite which is fully subservient to Russia. And what happens now in Georgia seems to be an illustration of this point.
And there's another question from Anna Lejava, who is talking about, whoops, let me just chop that, who is talking, kind of picking up on this issue and saying, what about, can the US can still exert influence in the region, especially when countries like China and several Gulf states are offering alternative support systems to autocrats in places like Belarus and Georgia? What is, maybe we broaden it a little bit and bring it back to Hungary and that part of that we were paying attention to. What would you say is the role of China? I mean, after all, Russia and China are allies right now. Does China play a role in Hungary and its relationship, or is it a little too far afield at this point?
Well, I wish to refrain from mixing the two topics because how things evolve between Hungary and China is a story at this moment separate from what happens between Hungary, Russia, and Ukraine. China, of course, talked about limitless support or alliance, you name it, between Beijing and Moscow. I would add a grain of salt to this, and luckily I see that China is not willing to engage fully in Mr. Putin's adventure. As far as Hungary and China are concerned, yes, there are strong economic ties, but I wouldn't say that these are out of bounds with what is elsewhere being seen in the EU. Maybe the United States is not entirely happy with China's economic presence in Hungary, but I think that this still fits into the kind of bilateral ties that we would be willing to benefit from, seeing that China has gone through a phase of amazing development and has become a pioneer in areas like renewable energy. And these are the areas where Hungary is willing to benefit from China. However, I need to add that we are willing to stay in bounds as an EU country with the European jurisdictions with respect to the presence of China in Europe. So I don't think that this should be seen as a relationship of convenience based on simply and fully on Hungarian interests. It's not the case. China, of course, is happy to see European countries and not just Hungary, where it can plant its industry and access European markets more easily. A bit more problematic is the BRI, which also impacts Hungary. I don't know what is the future of BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, which has at least one important project in Hungary, which by the opinion of economists will never be truly successful enterprise, because it will never be able to pay for itself, in other words. This, however, I have to say that when we are looking at Europe as a whole, Europe has an interest in cultivating balanced relations with China, if not for another reason, because of its current difficult situation vis-à-vis Russia.
Mm-hmm. You know, I have the opportunity to have both Ambassador Busztin and Michael David Fox. And so I want to ask a question that would kind of, I'd get both of your opinions on. It might be the last question because it's a little broad. But I'm looking at, again, looking at that region that we're talking about on the western border of Russia, the institutions that we've been talking about for 45 minutes, the EU and NATO, right? So these are two post-war institutions that have held and have really transformed the region. They are kind of the backbone economically and security wise. So how strong is your faith, and this is to both gentlemen, how strong is your faith that they will remain united, strong, effective, and able to solve some of these forces that are taking place in the region? Maybe we begin, maybe Michael, you could begin, and then we can go to Ambassador Busztin.
I'll say a few words maybe, and Ambassador Busztin can supplement my thoughts, but I think we are living in a period of real flux and uncertainty in terms of the entire international order. So the kind of rule-based system that had emerged after World War II, and which benefited the US, and the US, one could say about had its thumb on the scale, but it still created a great degree of stability despite many crises during the Cold War and after. But right now, we are seeing that changes in the US and also China are leading into a kind of real disequilibrium in the international order. So it's very hard to predict, right, what might happen, because a lot of things are more possible in a period of disequilibrium than in a period of stability. But for example, you talk about the EU. I mean, what's going to happen domestically if places like France or Romania or Poland turned to the right wing of the political spectrum, right, which could really have an impact. So I'm gonna, as a historian, I really hesitate to predict the future. But one question that I'll fold in here to Ambassador Busztin is that might be applicable here is your background in Middle East studies, which is you were ambassador to Iran. You had a background in Arabic studies and Middle Eastern studies. Does any of your experience in that region make suffer some insights or lessons into what Jill has asked about the future of the EU and NATO? Right, we're in this period of disequilibrium. I would just be interested personally, since you're immersed in one region and then you've been such an observer of Hungary, Europe, and current politics in Eastern Europe as well.
Well, thank you very much. What I can say based on my experience in the Middle East is that when you have a maze of countries, most of them middle powers, living together with various interests and various backgrounds and often times colliding histories, it is of an utmost necessity to find a common umbrella. And this has been underway in the Middle East for some time. The most successful attempt at this was the creation of the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is, of course, very potent and economically, financially, especially powerful agent of interests of Gulf interests. And a less spectacular success was the Arab League, which is still an umbrella organization of the entire Arab world, but finds it very difficult to speak with one voice. But let me go a bit further, because the other example I like to quote is ASEAN, because ASEAN was composed of countries with completely different ideological moorings. You found communist Vietnam and Singapore in one organization, which is quite astonishing. But Asian wisdom came up with solutions based on the conclusion that being together is in the common interest of all. And the EU, with its, of course, its imperfections even, I think is the most successful organization of its kind, because it is holding together, and for decades now, countries of a continent that was for centuries torn by war and strife. And what brought us together in EU was the recognition that war should never, ever happen again in Europe. This is why what happened between Russia and Ukraine, or rather Russia unleashing its aggression against Ukraine, was a rude awakening. And again, this is why NATO is absolutely indispensable, because NATO on the military side is a shield. It is not a threat. By no means it is a threat. And increasingly, even outside Europe, in the global south, countries start to have, let us say, a more nuanced view of what NATO is. NATO was very widely and generally refused everywhere in the global south. Now, my feeling is that this perception is changing. It is being seen more like a factor of stability. And I hope that both NATO and EU can capitalize on this role, and that both organizations will continue moving ahead, adjusting to the changing circumstances and fulfilling their historic mission, which is keeping peace in Europe and elsewhere, wherever these two organizations have a remit and have an influence and have a presence.
Very well said. We have, let's see, we have 5 more minutes. Ambassador Busztin, I had such benefit from our discussions in Budapest, and you have, as Michael said, such a broad view of this entire world. But maybe we return to Hungary, because we don't talk about Hungary, I think, as much as we should. You're Hungarian, you've grown up there, you've had all of those experiences abroad. What are your hopes for, let's say, the short and the medium term for Hungary going forward in Europe? What are you personally devoting your time to in that regard? What do you hope will be the role of your country in Europe?
Thank you so much. First and foremost, I hope that Hungary will have a government which is straightforward, engaged with the EU, dedicated to European values, working together with Europe, working together with NATO, and finding ways to make this European continent cohesive and peaceful again. And in line with this, of course, I hope that Hungary will regain its friends in Europe and the world over. We have, sadly, because of these very unpredictable policies, we have lost a lot of influence among our friends. And I would wish to say that if Hungary regains its position in the international field, we are hopeful that we again will be able to be central element of our part of the world. Central Europe, as you see, our countries lumped together, Austria, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Hungary. We were one unit. We were the Habsburg Empire. It was an organic, natural development in history that brought us together. I think we have a mission together, and I believe that Hungary can play a very important role in re-establishing this cooperation if we have a government, once again, fully engaged, honestly engaged with Europe. And along these lines, I also wish to say that we very much need the United States to be watchful of us, of Europe in general, but Central Europe in particular. Sad to say, but let's not forget that 2 world wars started in our region. This region has always been a region with a difficult history. Small, almost invisible sparks can set off major fires. I hope this will not happen again, but we have to watch carefully, and especially in a difficult geopolitical environment, we have to make sure that we leave nothing for the unexpected. And I hope that the United States will remain a dedicated and strong player in Europe. And I hope the United States will be always close to Hungary. Your embassy in Szabadság tér, which is Liberty Square, and ornate with the monument of Ronald Reagan, will be again a place where Hungary and the United States can constantly meet and conduct a fruitful dialogue on our work together for a better Hungarian and a better European future. So we want more America, not less.
Well, thank you very much for that eloquent statement. And I really appreciate, on behalf of our participants, and I'm sure Michael, maybe we'll give you a chance to say goodbye. But I want to thank you personally, Ambassador Busztin, for all of the mind-opening ideas that you have given me. And I'm quite intrigued with going back to the region and understanding it better. So thank you very much. And Michael, would you like to say farewell?
Yes. First of all, let me just thank the Carnegie Corporation of New York for sponsoring this program and our programs at CERES. That I think we should acknowledge, and thankfully, and then this has been a very illuminating and broad-based conversation, and I'm particularly pleased to see Hungary brought back in to our programming. So thank you so much for coming, Ambassador Busztin, and we hope to see you again.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.